It was joined a short time ago by the Liberal Senator and Assistant Minister to the Attorney-General, Amanda Stoker. I began by asking her what the government's proposal would actually mean for gay students, whether they would be at risk of expulsion or from not being able to be enrolled in a school.
We are really intent on making sure that kids don't face discrimination in their schooling, and that includes dealing with the part of Section 38(3) of the Sex Discrimination Act that deals with expulsion.
Okay, and would that be enrolment as well, though, or just expulsion?
Well, we're consulting. The commitment that we've made is in relation to expulsion.
Okay, so there'd be a possibility that a student's sexuality would mean they couldn't get enrolled at a school, or you're still weighing that up?
Look, I think it's important that we put this in a practical context. There's a whole range of different schools in our community. They cater to all different needs and all different beliefs. Parents and schools are going to be best placed to work together to find ways to accommodate the needs of students, whatever their needs may be, sexuality or otherwise. And as far as we can, governments should respect that. Now, we want to make sure that we eliminate unfair discrimination, but we don't want to interfere with the ability of parents and schools to be able to freely contract,
and I know,
because they know a student better than anyone else. And a lot of the time that
does happen, but there can be other examples, and the legal framework that you set still matters. That's your part of the job. So on the sexuality, you're unsure about enrolment, whether or not that would be something that could be enrolment could be refused based on sexuality. The
basis upon which we have proceeded so far is that we would deal with the situation of expulsion. Okay. And the reason that's important is because that's a disruption to an existing, I guess, schooling journey for that particular child.
So does that mean enrolment's left up to the school? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it means that we need to work in a much more real way. These prescriptive, faraway debates don't actually reflect the reality of how schools approach these things.
But we're talking about the legal framework that you're setting up.
Yeah, I know.
So we still just need to know whether or not what you're going to do on the enrolment side of things. Well, look, is that up in the air?
Well, it's not. Well, look, it's something we're prepared to consult with, particularly given the events of the last week. We aren't closing off anything. But let's take a step back here. If we go too far, particularly and take amendments like that was proposed by Ms Sharkey in the House and that was supported by Labor and the Greens and the Independents and a handful of Liberals, the consequences are not just to make sure that a person on the basis of gender identity or sexuality doesn't experience discrimination. The effect of that amendment would be to make it impossible for schools to be able to manage the behaviour of students, to be able to provide consequences for actions, for behaviours that go contrary.
I understand you said that they were poorly drafted changes.
But this is really significant. Those changes would have made single-sex schools basically non-viable from here on, unable to protect, for instance, girls in contact sport from injury, unable to provide practical workarounds for people in gender transition.
That hasn't passed, and I know that bill's not your intention. What about transgender students, though? So the same question for them in terms of what schools could do. Would they not be able to expel a transgender student?
The reason we referred this to the Australian Law Reform Commission for design in light of the religious discrimination bill that was to emerge from the Senate is because this stuff is so complex.
So that question...
And so it requires careful design. We accept the objective and we don't want to see transgender young people find themselves in situations where they're not being treated fairly and kindly and inclusively. But at the same time, we can't, in our efforts to accommodate that group, make all of the religious schools that cater to hundreds of thousands of families unable to operate according to their function. So as we try and thread that needle, we need to work with the Australian Law Reform Commission to carefully design that up.
Okay, so you've got an intention and you'll see what comes out of that. Just finally, do you envisage you could be treating single-sex schools differently to co-ed schools when changes are eventually made?
Look, probably not, although of course we'll work with the Australian Law Reform Commission's expertise on that design. And the reason is, for instance, that all of the risks that might arise in relation to, say, the safety of girls' sport in circumstances where you might have biological males presenting as females in a single-sex girls' school, all of those issues still arise in a co-ed school too. It's just that there are additional dimensions to take into account when you're dealing with single-sex schools.
Okay. You noted on Twitter One Nation Senator Pauline Hanson turned up to protest here, but hasn't had a great record at Parliament or attending Parliament. Has she been missing Parliament when she should not have been? Look,
I've seen Senator Hanson appear via video link from time to time, and of course that is a measure that's available for people who are unable to be in Canberra to do their duties. But there is a real question to be answered, I think, when you are well and able to come down to Canberra for a protest, but you aren't well and able enough or haven't provided an explanation as to why you can't be here for your parliamentary duties.
So has she not provided previous explanations? Is that the problem?
Not that I've seen, and it's...
Have you checked that?
I have, although not in the last 24 hours.
Okay.
So it's, I think, really important that we say to people like Senator Hanson and those who might think it is in their interest to spend their time campaigning rather than doing their parliamentary duties, that ultimately what you're campaigning for is to do those duties in the Australian Parliament. So show up and do them.
The issue itself, this protest, the government has been stressing in the past couple of days, in particular the PM, there are only mandates for aged care that you're responsible for. What about federal departments though? We're talking about quite a few thousands of workers and they could set a bit of a trend. The federal government has let them set vaccine mandates for their officers.
Look, my perspective, and I've been consistent on this throughout the pandemic, is that mandates are really only justifiable in high-risk environments. That's consistent with the advice of, say, the Fair Work Commission, and it's consistent with common sense because while vaccination is the smart thing to do and it's the right thing to do for individuals and for your personal and family health, ultimately decisions about what medicines go into your body should be for the individual.
So now, just on that then, if you had your way, there wouldn't be mandates for office workers, for someone just wanting to go to a cafe or a pub?
Well, we know these things are in the hands of the premiers. If I were the Premier of Queensland, I wouldn't have imposed mandates. I think mandates are deeply illiberal. That said, we should be doing everything we can to help individuals understand that these vaccines are safe, that they are smart, that they are sensible, and that it's part of the way that they can help us all move into a life where we can freely associate again in our community in the way that we like to.
What's your message to the protesters that are here at Canberra at the moment?
We understand you. We are sympathetic, at least, to those of you who come at it from those really very normal perspectives about just wanting to be able to go about your work taking sensible precautions.
So when you say those of you, there are some pretty fringe elements there too.
That's right. There's some rat bags in there, and I don't pretend that I don't pretend to understand what makes them tick. Okay. But there are handfuls of good people in that crowd. And to the extent that those people are struggling with something for which they are not getting the flexibility and practicality in state government mandate enforcement that they need, I'm sympathetic and I'm prepared to keep holding the feet of the state governments to the fire.
Amanda Stoker, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Tom.